am.
Recording, I can see that up there. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're happy to have everyone with us today. I will go ahead and call this meeting to order at 3:01 p.m. And I understand the first order of business is to elect a chair of this budget committee. Yes. So I would open the floor to any nominations for a chair of the budget committee.
I'll nominate Ken Henson as chair of the budget committee.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We don't ask you if you're willing, we just. We have a motion and a second. Ken, actually, we do ask, are you willing? Okay, great. So with motion and second, we will call for the vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. At this point, I will hand the gavel, so to speak, over to you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Mr. McCall, will you walk us through the budget summary, please?
With pleasure. So I will start just as we have in echoing real bad.
You might push it away from you.
Yeah.
So one of those microphones is very sensitive and the other one is less so, so it's.
Whatever. Yeah, I'll do just like we have in years past. I'll start, we go through each of the funds, start with the 410 fund, which is our biggest and our operating fund. Then after that, I'll go to the 420 and 430. So as I said, our 410 fund is our main operating fund. That is where we receive essentially almost all of our revenues and have almost all of our expenses go out of that fund. What you see from years previously is not drastically different. I would point out one thing just right at the top of the first page, which I'm not sure how we're going to talk about, but we will bring up. So you'll see proposed beginning balance with $450,000. But if you looked at your, what do we call these pages? The
Statement of revenue and expenditure.
statement of revenue and expenditure. With that, you would see that we should have a higher figure as far as cash on hand if we go based on that. The Solid Waste Advisory Committee discussed a recommendation from me and recommended to the Budget Committee that you consider us doing a $250,000 one-time transfer from our operating fund, from 410, into our sinking fund, yet in this fiscal year. So before the next fiscal year. That's why this starting budget is a little bit lower.
And so to follow up on that, I will be reaching out to all of you because it is increasing, or finance going into more than 10%. I'll have to notice a call supplemental budget hearing for it, which should take all of about 5 minutes. So I'm thinking just online, virtual, I'll sit in the room, but I will be sending that notification out to you guys to get it in the paper.
So it's not last year's budget committee that needs to look at the supplemental because it's last year's budget, or did you want us as the new budget committee? I'm new to this.
I would prefer new. I'll double check the budget law, but I think it can be the committee that's sitting currently. If not, I do have 4 with Kevin and the commissioners that were on it last year.
And as of now, you are on the Budget Committee. So. Yeah.
As a student member.
But so just a little explanation as to why, sorry.
Just to be clear, so the $450,000 proposed budget beginning balance already includes the transfer of $250,000 to the same.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
perfect, thank you.
And we had already had a $400,000 item, no, it was capital outlay. So did we not have any going in? We had 100, no, nothing this year. So this is because we hadn't budgeted
No,
previously.
we do a transfer, it's under, it's on page 2, I believe.
I was looking at budget for,
It's page 2, it's GL code 9883. So this year we've transferred 155,000 from the 410 into the 420. See down towards the bottom of the page?
I see transfer budgeted for 255. Oh, 150, that's 23,
In the middle of the page, David.
Oh, I'm sorry, I guess I'm looking at my previous version. Yeah, sorry.
So looking at the 22-23, we do have a transfer out budgeted for 255 to the sinking fund.
No, so Oh, sorry, yeah, that is this fiscal year,
That's this
255,
year.
that's correct.
And
Yeah.
so you're going to do, in addition to that,
Correct.
250 more?
Correct.
Okay.
And a big part of the reasoning with that is that we have been expending money from our sinking fund for our Manzanita construction project, which is going a little over, and and with the planning and engineering services for the Pacific City project, we will be spending more by the end of June than we had budgeted for. So we need to push that up a little bit. But in addition, because we are in the process of obtaining 2 state revolving fund loans, partial forgivable loans to finance these projects, it would probably look better if someone in the state review board is looking at our budget. It would look better to see if they see that we have $350,000 or $400,000 in the sinking fund to start the year than if we only have $100,000. So it gives us a better financial picture there. And we have this money available in the operating fund to do it. So
Thank
so
you.
rather than suggesting it for next year, that's why I suggested it for now. So I guess back up to the top there. So that was the explanation for the very first line that we have. Other than that, they are pretty standard figures that we have. You'll see solid waste fees increasing from 3.65 million to 3.95 million. That is reflection of increasing quantities, but also the 5% increase in disposal fees that will go into effect July 1st and that are already approved. Other than that, that section and revenues and that is pretty straightforward, I believe.
What's miscellaneous revenue, Dave?
Miscellaneous revenue is primarily the revenue from bottles and cans that we get, maybe scrap metal,
Okay.
selling some paint,
Right.
things like that. There's a whole bunch of different things that get grouped.
I just added, yeah, I got it, okay.
So. Oh, okay, I thought you were pointing something out.
So, Dave, so you're expecting revenues, solid waste revenues to go up by 700,000 for next year? Is that correct? That you had, I'm looking at actuals 21, 22, I'm sorry.
Compared to 2 years ago?
Yeah. Okay. So that's going up quite a bit.
I mean, that's a reflection very much when COVID hit,
Yeah,
trash came through the gates.
okay.
We went, depending on which transfer station we looked at, an increase of 28 to 31% in 1 year.
That's quite good.
And that's, I mean, if you look back at the 3.8 to the 4.2,
Yeah.
that's where we see in that. It took us off guard, but,
Yeah.
and the surprising thing is it continues. It hasn't dropped off. And that's across the board. I mean, and it doesn't affect our finances very much, but if we look at the recycling numbers for Tillamook County, we have increased our quantity of recycled materials by nearly 50% in the last 4 years. A lot of that is commercial. Werner's putting their new warehouse online. Someone else put another one online, so they've got a lot of cardboard there, Fred Meyer's, Safeway, but all in all, it's a huge increase.
Everybody's recycling.
And it's very good that we started our process to expand our capacity in the transfer stations back in 2017, 2018. Because they're finally coming through and we need that capacity. If we were starting now, we would be in trouble.
Yeah.
More trouble. Okay, some of the admin expenses here, really nothing exciting as we look through them all. We're looking to maintain our budgeted FTE of 8.5 staff. When you look at the actuals from previous years, you see a couple years 5 and 6. At that time, we still had budgeted 7.5 or 8.5, but we didn't have we weren't able to hire, we didn't have the people there.
How many vacancies do you have right now?
1.5 FTE. So our education specialist and our code enforcement officer. Fortunately, we are finally staffed up in the transfer stations, which was not an easy task either. Yeah, so there's nothing, I don't think there's anything spectacular, big changes in there. You know, we've seen increases in personnel costs, you know, wage costs, retirement, health insurance, you know, across the board. But our people are important and those are expenses.
What are the odds of getting an enforcement officer?
Vegas odds are different.
Vegas odds, right?
Probably be better off putting $5 on the roulette wheel.
But that's something that's still, we can talk about, right? Okay.
Does Deputy Hill, does he do any solid waste code enforcement, or is it just you?
When I bake hard enough, he sometimes comes and helps. But very little.
Fine.
So do you see the need for that, David?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It is an incredible time spent something.
So why have we been reluctant to fund that?
Well, it's not reluctantly funded. We have funded it every year.
Okay.
It's getting a person there. So our code enforcement officer was a retired deputy.
Right.
He retired from retirement in 2020.
I remember we talked about that, right?
And at that point, and since then, we have budgeted for half of the cost of a full-time deputy. With the sheriff's department so understaffed.
It hasn't been a priority from their side.
If they're looking for 14, 15, 16 people,
Yeah,
It's
I
all a
got it.
priority
Oh, yeah.
from their side.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
they just are not,
They don't
not
have
people.
to.
Yeah.
I mean, they're good because I don't feel comfortable trying to issue citations to people. And when it gets to the point where I say, yep, I'm at my wit's end, please, I send Matt Kelly an email. He sends a deputy out to try to give him a ticket. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
East Beaver Creek, you know, we'll have the deputy show up like East Beaver Creek when we did the cleanup.
Yeah, I see
Yeah,
that
yeah,
in the
yeah.
paper there, yeah. Yes.
And when we did the Sand Lake cleanup, you know, which wasn't out of the solid waste budget, but it was just coordinated. Well, I guess when we were doing the cleanup, there wasn't, but when we went in for the asbestos inspection, they had a deputy there, that was actually Deputy Hill. He was there the entire time with that, and they were always just a call away if we needed them, because there were sensitive situations. When we did the Eckroth Road, I think they had 4 or 5 deputies show up for that, and they were welcomed.
So are you reimbursing them out of this fund?
They have never charged us for it.
So the
I think it's kind of the amount of time that he's not able to spend, that it's more administratively not worth it to reimburse.
Just checking since it's a budget.
Dave, you want to start keeping track of time?
Sorry?
You want to start keeping track of everybody's time?
How much time they're allowed to speak?
For now, I guess, if you guys want to be here. No.
No,
No?
but, no. And I also, so we focus on code enforcement, but it's not just that. Like, an example, a couple of weeks ago, we had a drug take-back event, which is, the DEA organizes these, you know, we choose whether or not we participate as a county. But what we have done for several years, we've coordinated, and we've done the drug take-back, but also in the same time, we've had a Sharps take-back, and the health department has done some event with it as well. You know, in the fall, it's been a vaccine clinic. In the spring, this time they did Tillman Family Counseling Center, did a resource fair, and so different education opportunities or engagement opportunities there. Because we no longer have a deputy, uniform deputy with our staff, the sheriff's department provides the deputy, and it's a DEA requirement that they have to have a uniform deputy to do the drug part, because there could be controlled substances in the mix. And so the sheriff's department has supplied that deputy with no charge, just as part of their commitment to it. So it's not just code enforcement, it's also other activities.
I think too, when you look at the code enforcement officer, it's more than just a deputy, you know, a uniformed deputy riding on site. It's the letters, the documentation for these people, it's all that additional time that used to be taken by others. And Mr. McCall's been, you know, basically filling that role as well. Hopefully, moving forward, we might have some options where, you know, with staffing, we can relieve some of those duties from the board.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
So I know that I've asked this question in the past at SWAC meetings, but I'll just ask it again for this meeting. Would we get any traction if we fully funded one FTE code enforcement officer?
I'm not sure whose liaison to the sheriff's office. I don't know if there would be a better possibility if we fully funded a deputy to be able to find someone or not.
I don't know either.
It's a fair question, yeah.
Knowing the amount of time that Mr. McCall spends on code enforcement and lack of efficacy, not wearing a uniform and having a badge, and I wonder if it wouldn't be worth maybe going down that path.
It's a good question. I know it's been discussed before, and there have been models about sharing. There was a time when we shared a code enforcement officer with the Department of Community Development. I don't know what happened to that. Do you remember? COVID?
So we budgeted for it, then COVID came and they pulled the funds because they thought that there was gonna be a huge collapse because of COVID and there wouldn't be funding for it. And that's why we still have the 50%, but DCD doesn't. And I think they, was it 0.25 is what they?
Right, so when I asked her, she could do upwards of 0.25, and I don't know if that actually pays the budget or not. So we're 3/4 of the way to staff the code enforcement officer.
So, would your budget be able to handle a full-time code enforcement with all the benefits involved? I mean, do you have enough, I mean, it looks like you have enough money in this budget, but, you know, to do that.
I mean, it's built with the 8.5, of which the half is the code enforcement. I mean, part of the reason that our budget and our results have been so healthy over the past few years is because we've been understaffed. And when you have 2 or 3 positions that you don't fill, that money is there at the end. Would we have enough extra fat in it to cover an extra half an FTE? I think we could find a place to do it. If that would come, and I think we could do it without having to cut into education and transportation station staffing.
We would still have to get a uniformed officer to come and show up for those times.
They're about 116, 117 with benefits.
So if you could afford it, and if, you know, and if you didn't have full-time work, there's many local cities that need code enforcement, because none of us have them, and we'd be willing to, you know, we've all talked, the city's talked about sharing code enforcement already. So it's a
Remember, I came and asked
conversation.
you last year if you would share yours with me, and you said no.
So, would that officer have to be under the sheriff's department? I mean, I assume you can't just hire a code enforcement. I assume they have to operate under a sheriff, or is that not correct?
Technically, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't have to. I mean, I'm thinking back, Rockaway Beach several years ago had code enforcement who was retired from law enforcement, but he just had his own Rockaway Beach uniform. And I think a lot of what he was doing was building and short-term rental enforcement, but also their water lines and stuff. So he wasn't part of the sheriff's department. He was city code enforcement.
Right, but he was under a city police chief.
I believe.
I guess my question is, I assume they need to operate inside a law enforcement agency as opposed to solid waste simply hiring one, which means really probably this conversation will be a conversation with the sheriff relating to if they need to operate under the sheriff's department in the event that there was funding for one, would the sheriff prioritize that, given that at this point the challenge is not having enough bodies? So there was a request from the sheriff's office to do some parking enforcement, and he said, I would love to, but I just, in PC, and there was funding. But the answer was, there are not enough bodies, and I can't prioritize parking enforcement over true safety on the road. And so I think it's a sheriff conversation potentially to say, if we were able to provide the funding from this side, would you, you know, because would you? Because I think it probably has to operate under that law. I mean, help me.
Maybe, well, maybe not. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But could you not issue a code violation?
I can do that today, I just don't want to.
Yeah, that's
You know,
right.
I mean, I don't
So-
feel safe doing
Right.
it.
So
in
it
most
isn't, it
cases.
isn't technically that we need a deputy to issue a violation. It's the safety factor.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Interesting conversation, interesting question, is
Yeah.
whether they have to be functioning underneath a law enforcement agency. I assume for us, they would function under a Teamsters contract. So there's a whole bunch of weird
Technical
little
stuff.
details.
But I guess the bottom point though
Yeah.
is that if it is possible, Sean, can you add it to the budget in the middle of the session and the supplemental for personnel or not?
It wouldn't change this budget by more than 10%, so if it's something that
Could make happen.
could make happen, then I can add it, without having to call another meeting.
Does that work for you guys?
Yeah, we- So are we recommending as three? They have that?
Well, what we're recommending is that they have a conversation with, to see if they can get a full-time code enforcement officer to pay for it.
Okay.
Just at least, continue the investigation.
And I would go back to you and ask, do you feel like you need a full-time code enforcement officer? Do you have ample work for a full-time code enforcement officer? And/or would you be willing to manage hiring one out to the cities?
So, in my personal opinion, what I've seen over the last few years with my ineffectiveness, I think that if we had a full-time officer, we could keep that full-time officer busy for months, just playing catch-up and trying to get. Whether or not it would be maintainable as a full-time, I'm not sure, but in that situation, once we've caught up and done a better job, I'd be more than happy to talk to the cities about sharing and hiring
Seems like we could keep one busy on Miami Foley Road for about 6 months.
out. Once we take care of East Beaver Creek.
Which
Yeah, that-
brings up another question, which is just who hears those citations? And do we have the capacity in the rest of the system as well to manage a full-time person issuing citations? They go to justice court first, right? Or do they? go-
Justice Court, no,
Justice
this-
court. Okay, and then when they get, we have one that was appealed that, it's taken a lot of our time.
So if you can't keep them busy full-time afterwards, there's the Parks Department that is always wanting a deputy there, especially on the weekends and the holidays. They reimburse the general fund.
Even though we are complaint driven,
Yeah.
we've got so many complaints that, part of my issue is I just don't have the time to follow up on a lot of the complaints. I go out there, I send a letter, and if they're responding to me, then I get there 6 weeks later instead of 2 weeks later. But if they don't respond to me, I tend to forget about them. And I just go there when I go by there, and maybe 3 months have gone by, and they still haven't done anything. And if it goes longer than 6 months, one day longer than 6 months, Justice Court will throw it out.
So, how short is the sheriff's office right now? Sheriff's office?
Well, they have a bunch of people in background checks.
So there's a potential.
Maybe. Yeah.
It appears that things might be getting better. Actually, or lots of hiring going on in law enforcement.
We just need a half of a person to finish office at 8.5 state to 9.
I like the idea of hiring a full-time person, give them as much work as you can out of solid waste, but then parsing them out to the cities as needed.
Parks.
Or county
I
parks.
think the community development may find that they're retired, may re-retire.
Fully retire.
Right, and might be wanting to share again as well. So I think there's definitely plenty of work to be done if the position was available and able to be done.
Okay. All right, let's move on. I did not anticipate that being such a big discussion. Yes. Next one. Up here. So with vehicles, that's your line 9030. That's about a third of the way down on page 2. We had budgeted for a vehicle this last year, but fancy that, it's not going to be here, so we're pushing it into next year, but hey, we've got an order. So,
You buying a car to drive or equipment?
no, we're looking at I guess it was 2 years ago, I don't even know when we ordered it, but it's been here like a year and a half.
Okay.
We got a hybrid F-150 from Ford, and I've been been very pleased with it. And so I've ordered an identical one. If it's identical, why it costs more, I don't know, but it's costing a little more.
And it's taking a while to get.
I do have a question.
I wouldn't be surprised if we push into next year as well.
And I don't know if this is, so under recycling promotions 7851, you don't have any money in
Yeah, I
there.
was questioning that too.
And I know that you've been advertising in the Headlight Herald regularly on solid waste, and so do you have that budgeted somewhere else?
It pops up a little bit later.
Okay, thank you.
So that's under the general admin expenses, the largest part of which is personnel related. When we go down to the second half of second page, there you see on the left, it says transfer station expenses. So this is our largest chunk of expenses because the money that we have coming in, the majority of it is coming in through solid waste fees, so disposal fees. The money that either people pay or haulers pay to drop off their trash or yard debris at the transfer stations. And that is a direct cost for us, so we have revenue coming in, but cost going out is just under $3 million anticipated for this next year. And of that $2.995, $2.5 million is the portion that goes to Donnelly Road Recycling for the operation of the transfer station and hauling away our trash and our debris and paying for the disposal of that trash. We also have, so the big line items in there, about $165,000, which is our composting expense. You know, compost is a valuable nutrient-rich material, but it still costs us money to dispose of it. For them to operate the composting site, we have just under $110,000 budgeted for direct operating costs at the Manzanita transfer station. That's primarily hauling the materials from there onto our Tillamook site or to the glass recycling place. Approximately $40,000 for the same for the Pacific City transfer station. We've got a little contingency in there. We've got some management costs budgeted for both Manzanita and Pacific City. That all together is what brings together that $2.995 million. Which you just see as one line item. And our operating contingency, in the past, we had a practice, I'm not sure where it came from, but to try to keep $25,000 in, I'm sorry, what's in here, different line. Operating contingency, so $120,000 is just to have extra contingency there. You know, we have had the issue in the past where more trash came in than we anticipated, significantly more, and we didn't have the budget to expend that. You know, the revenue was coming in, but we didn't have budgeted the expenses, so we put in $120,000 extra expense so that we have that spending power.
So John, can I ask how you're going to handle that since we call it a contingency?
If you overspend a line item, then I can't clean it up with other unspent funds and line items, then you'll see a board order line item transferring it from contingency into that line.
Okay, all right.
Okay, the top of page 3, right? Yep. Top of page 3, you see those are closed landfill expenses. You know, the landfill that was closed 35-ish years ago. Expenses that we still incur with it. The largest chunk is monitoring expenses. You know, we have the experts come out and take samples and check. And as in previous years, you know, I still continue to include money in there for a capital outlay. If we're able to figure out a good and what appears to be reliable solution to try and treat our diluted leachate to remove the iron and the ammonia from that, to actually have a little spending money in there without going into a full capital project. So, you know, not a lot of difference in our budget there. I mean, what you see in previous years, we didn't spend most of that money, but we have it budgeted so that we were able to when we need it.
Monitoring is expensive.
Oh, yes.
Although it has gone down. You know, the consultant we work with has been real good about figuring out ways we can actually decrease. One of the things with our new permit coming up, we will no longer have to monitor for methane twice a year. but once every 2 years. You know, yeah, it's not a lot of money, but it does matter, things like that.
Are you still using parametrics?
On the lower half of that page then, you have what's called RHC expense. This is kind of a catch-all for a lot of different things. Recycling, household hazardous waste, and composting is what it originally meant. Now you have about $100,000 in the hazardous waste program there. We also have $40,000 for recycling promotion. That's what Leanne was asking about. That's where that comes in, the $40,000 a year. What we have done is you'll see the no charge disposal. Sorry, not charge. The code enforcement program. Code enforcement program. In previous years, we budgeted $5,000 a year for that. That is for these cleanups that the property has not been foreclosed on, therefore the commissioners in their housing fund can't take over the expenses of it, but it needs to be cleaned up. This is where East Beaver Creek is being allocated to. Like I said, we had $5,000 a year in that. Then we've, on SRAC's recommendation, we've upped it to $20,000. And if we get to Miami, it won't be enough.
Right.
But the purpose of that is for those properties where we have to go in, cover the expenses ourselves, put a lien on the property, and in anticipation that it will take years to actually get that money back.
So what are you getting for the 50,000 in machinery and equipment? What do you guys need on that? It's a little ways up on the page
That was the
there. Under capital outlay, machinery and
Oh,
equipment, 50,000.
So that is for the leachate treatment pilot. If we can get so what we're trying to do is get a naturally working treatment process to go out with special types of plants to be able to run this diluted leachate through it, and they can absorb the ammonia out of it.
I see that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we try.
I think you're trying everything.
Yeah, that's what that is
Okay.
earmarked for.
So to keep trying different things.
Once we finally find somebody that has something that has a chance of working.
Okay.
Because we've had lots of error along with our trials. You know. And not necessarily error on our part, but it just hasn't worked. It's not a perfect world.
Come on.
Okay, and so, did you want to? No, that was the $20,000. Yeah, okay, so following that is the summary sheet for the 410s.
Before we move on, sorry, so under the no charge disposal, so I think you just sent me an email stating that, so a lot of people are working on reducing the wildfire, so Firewise program, which is defensible space around your homes, and that now that there is free disposal for vegetation from, for the Firewise, so is that $3,000 enough for that?
No.
Who's paying for
That's
that?
that's nothing to do with that.
Okay.
So this $3,000 is to fund things like when people clean up the trash alongside the roads, or they do the salt cleanup events, things like that, maybe a tire day or something. So that's those types of special events. What you got my email about is part of the ODF voucher program, which has, just so you're aware, up until now it's only been available to residents. It was not available for any commercial use. ODF is putting in a new grant to get some significant funding that would carry the program for at least 3, maybe up to 5 years, and which would include commercial clearing, not commercial, how to put this, so in areas where even if they have a contractor who would go in and clear out an area, maybe the home hasn't maintained it in decades and it's become overgrown, so they could go in with equipment and clear that out and have that as a covered expense. So it would be like our no fee disposal type letter, where we would talk to the contractor, we would approach us, say, we've got this piece of land, it's, 20 by 200 feet, and this is what we're gonna do, and we would issue a letter to that contractor that they can bring in the debris from that property that they're clearing up, and they wouldn't have to pay for it, but it would be paid for by ODF.
through the Title III program?
No, this would be through this different grant. So that the Title III can stay for the residential and some of the more outreach type things. So this grant that they're applying for doesn't allow for any personnel or outreach and things like that. So they're just figuring out multiple pools of money, and that would be something that could be paid for out of that, so that the more flexible forms can be
Thank you.
flexible. Okay, so next we have our, what's the fourth? This is our sinking fund. This is basically our savings account for capital improvement projects. And as I said, so when we start with this, you see we're starting with 450. This is the summary, summary sheet, so.
Did I miss something?
I thought we missed a few pages there.
Yeah, we skipped over, so we have a summary sheet.
Going back to the summary sheet.
Were there any questions on the 410 fund before we move on to 420? Hearing none, now we can move on to the 420, which is our sinking fund, or capital, basically savings account for capital improvement projects. Here you see we're starting with $350,000. That's including the $250,000 that we would transfer over this year into that, so we've got a little healthier starting balance. $2.5 million. It's here under refunds and reimbursements because we felt that was a good place to put it. Yes. So these are the two state revolving fund loans that we would receive.
Keep it separated from the 410 fund.
And so we're still anticipating transferring $155,000 over from our normally operating into this fund this year, but we would also receive that $2.5 million. Now, when we get down to expending that $2.5 million is when it becomes a little more interesting, because part of that money we've already expended. So if commissioners will recall, I came and asked for permission to submit these applications. It was, I want to say, in December of '22. Anything that we expended from that point is eligible to be included for reimbursement under the loans. The loans have not yet been approved. They have not yet been published. They have a list. We're on the list to go to public comment. We should have been anticipating signing contracts in May, but some additional funding has become available for emerging contaminants, PFAS, VOCs, and some other nasty things. And so they're trying to kick some of that money, which they don't yet know how much it's going to be, but put it into these funding opportunities so that some of the projects can get some extra forgivable loan financing in it. Therefore, that publication has been delayed. So now we're looking at, I think realistically, more like July at the earliest. But once we receive that, then we can submit, and we've signed the contract, then we can submit for reimbursement from what we've already expended in Manzanita and Pacific City for engineering services. Because about 72% is what we put in there for eligible for stormwater. So these are related to stormwater improvements. That's what we put in for. So we would receive the money, be able to reimburse ourselves basically for what we expended last year. That makes sense. And then moving forward, as we spend money, we can get reimbursed for it. And to further complicate matters, so you have here a breakdown with 3 different sites and what they're looking at under the capital improvement part. But to further complicate things, the way the revolving fund works is when they send us money, up 50% up to $500,000 is forgivable loan, which they immediately credit. So say that we expend $700,000, and of that, $550,000 is eligible under this. We submit that to them. They send us $550,000 and tell us, you only have to repay us $275,000. But you don't have to start repaying until the project is complete, which in our case, they're smaller projects, so it's just a few months later. but, you know, and the interest doesn't come up at that time either, so it makes it complicated. We don't yet know the interest rates because we don't have the contract. You know, we have to budget for repayments in this. I budgeted in this for repayments of, payments would be twice a year. I budgeted Manzanita to have 2 payments during this next fiscal year, and Pacific City 1.
And
We'll
that's in
see.
the $81,000. That's the 81,000 principal payment?
Correct. And in the expenditures there, you have unappropriated, that 110,000. That's why we have to keep in unappropriated the amount for an entire year's worth of repayments for both of them. So I guess that that's gonna be $110,000 between principal and interest.
That will be for the following year.
Correct. Make sense?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. All right. So following that, we have this is the summary sheet from that same thing. I think and Sean and I discussed that in future years moving forward, because this, we're guessing at some of those numbers. In future years, we'll probably put at the bottom also how much is to be repaid over the next, 18 years, 17 years, whatever, because they're 20-year loans, which we can repay quicker if we want to at no penalty.
Sean, it's not like you to guess.
Those David's guess. I'm waiting for the paperwork.
I'm including you in my confusion.
I understand it.
So the last page we have here is by far the simplest. We have a closed landfill and are required to have a post-closure reserve so that when the landfill, so post-treatment afterwards, it's anticipated, 30 years after a landfill is closed, it has to have monitoring things. Our landfill has been closed for 33 years now. We should be off the hook, but we're not because we have this diluted leachate, which is still coming out and still causing problems and issues, and we haven't found the solutions for it yet. So DEQ requires us to have an amount in reserve set aside, which is equivalent for 10 years worth of monitoring and replacement costs. This comes to approximately $1.2 million. They said $1 million in this fund is good enough, close enough, adequate for that. So over the course of several years, we built up that $100,000 a year going in. We have a little over $1 million in that fund. We can only touch that if DEQ approves of touching it. So, and realistically, the time we would be able to touch that is when we get to a point where this trial that I keep talking about, we get something that actually works, we figure it out, we got it going, and so our monitoring costs go from $60,000 a year down to $20,000 a year. And our operating costs go from, $20,000 down to $5,000 or something. And therefore, we don't have to have 10 times that plus replacement in reserve. We don't have to have $1.2 million or $1 million, but we only need $300,000. At that point, DEQ would look at it and say, good job, you can reduce the $1 million down to $300,000, take the $700,000 and go to Hawaii.
So where's your $1 million? I don't see it.
It's the last page. It's $1,076,000.
Oh, there we go, I missed a page, okay. There we go. It's like, didn't find it.
Yeah, it's unappropriated because we can't touch it.
Yeah.
And what we discussed, got approval from DEQ, the interest that's gained from this $1 million worth of money is no longer going to go into this fund, where we can't touch it, but into our operating fund, the 410 fund.
So you're gaining some money out of that.
Yeah, I think we've been, no, I mean, when things got bad, it was $7,000 a year, $5,000 to $10,000.
And David, I did ask Under Sheriff Kelly if you guys had questions for him regarding a code enforcement officer. So I don't know if that's listening or you just clicked on meeting.
I'm listening because you told me to show up.
Welcome.
Sean is all powerful.
Hi, Matt. No, I didn't know if the solid waste budget committee members had any additional questions regarding a code enforcement officer, and I just made that really good to see if he's available to answer.
So Matt, what do you think the odds are of being able to hire a full-time code enforcement officer with money from solid waste?
I love the idea. One of my biggest complaints is I think we haven't done well as far as solid waste and community development, as far as the enforcement model of those two divisions. I think we're lacking for several years. But, you know, it's back to, I gotta get my minimum staffing up to just handle the day-to-day stuff, but that would be that's one of my first goals, is to do that, is to get David and Chris that mechanism and get Sarah that other part of it, so that we can, these ordinances actually mean something.
So the way you're looking at the possibility of hiring at this point, you think odds are getting better as we go forward in time, that people will be available, is that correct?
I am very optimistic, and that's, you know, I think most of us, most of you guys recognize that I am a little more rainbows and sunshines, glass half full guy. But as I've said before, the last budgeting the last hiring process we did was a lot more promising than the past ones. Also, the research I've done through when we're looking at somebody to hire, also follow up with the academy and see when they're scheduling out these academy dates. The last 2 years, there was no issue with getting anybody in academy because no law enforcement agency in the state could send anybody was hiring. The reason I looked at it today, if I hire somebody today, I can't get them into the academy until October. That tells me one thing, that everybody is turned the corner, everybody's hiring, people are coming back to work, and it's coming back. Is it perfect like we were 5-10 years ago? No, but I think the stuff that everybody's seeing in other departments in the county, we're already getting full staff. I think we're getting there too. It takes me 6 months to hire somebody, so I'm optimistic. I think there's actually data to back up what I'm saying.
So let me ask you one other question. So a code enforcement officer, they would be a fully deputized deputy in the sheriff's office, gun-toting, all that other good stuff?
Yes, I think the model before I was in the position I am, we've had kind of a pseudo-retirement 150 model. I think that works. I don't think it's in the best interest of us. I would like us to have a little more, but they do need to be deputized so they have that ability to levy citations on violators, because that's what's going to get us people into compliance.
So in a worst case scenario, you have a code enforcement officer and there's a huge emergency in the county. You would pull them off and utilize their services for other things other than code enforcement.
Absolutely. I would treat this contract like, I would treat it as a contract with the sheriff's office and solid waste. And I would treat it the same as I do with ODF, with Rockaway, with Garibaldi. And all of our agreements state just that. They will do their assigned duties and do what they're supposed to. They're being paid by whatever agency are to do. If something hits the fan and we have a homicide, we have pursuits, we have whatever, an active shooter, I expect every contract to rally and deal with that issue. And then when it's calmed down, the first thing I do when we get on scene is the situation's under control, I start sending those contracts back to where they're supposed to go to work. But yes, I expect them to handle the emergent situations, and then we cut them loose and go back to what we're being reimbursed for.
Thank you.
So if you were able to hire someone, let's say that everyone that came through this hiring was available and you were able to hire someone into a code enforcement, you're talking about them having to go to training, go to the academy. Would you be looking for the contract to pay for their training time? I mean, we're looking at whether we would put like a half-time person or a full-time person in the budget. So assume you could get somebody hired, let's pretend they were gonna go to academy in October. Would this contract need to start paying for them? Or are you looking at, I don't know how that part works.
Well, that's the complicated part in the situation that we're in currently. Because if I was fully staffed Now, maybe I would move somebody in to fill these contracts, one body, which I could tread water for a little bit. But at this point, I can't move somebody in that position at where I'm currently staffed and expect the day-to-day calls to survive, because I'd start paying overtime for vacations, sick days, and stuff. So, yeah, when I am not fully staffed, I would need to be able to fund that position to get them trained up. And to be honest, solid waste and code enforcement is a different beast, because not only do I have to teach them how to be a cop, how to do traffic stops, how to investigate crimes in some capacity. David and Chris's ordinances are a different level, not the standard deputy knows. It's another training process. They have to be educated so they can enforce it properly. So, yeah, it would be a little bit before they'd be suitable to be set free and do what they're supposed to be doing.
Sure.
That's the frustrating about all of it. It takes me so long to have an effective body to do what we need to do.
Sure.
One thing I was wondering about, Matt, is if you're fortunate enough to hire people to fill the vacant positions at the jail that you currently have filled with retirees, with retiree hires, would it then make sense to move a retiree hire into code enforcement?
It could be, if I can find the right guy to do that, because I would expect more of them. There's a level of responsibility that I think David and Chris and Sarah would demand from those people, because it is more than just doing jail transports. I mean, jail transports is important, it has its role, but there's not a lot of investigation and things of that nature. But, it's more of a assembly line process. I mean, there's requirements, but I think doing investigations, doing follow-ups, sending letters, doing stuff like that I think David and Sarah need for those, because and I think David and Sarah would tell you, is the biggest thing we have to get these violations so they're prosecutable at justice court, which is a challenging of itself. So you have to have good work product that gets all the way to the end of there. Otherwise, we're just wasting money.
Thank you.
So would you like to ask him, I mean, I told you I put $5 on the number 8. Would you like to ask him which he feels is more likely, how likelihood of getting somebody this 6 months or a year?
Did you hear the question, Matt?
No, I didn't quite catch it. I think it was how
That's
likely to
okay.
get the
It's okay, because Dave was mumbling.
He was.
So he was asking if you were to place a bet on the likelihood of finding somebody within 6 or 8 months, like should it be in this, in the upcoming budget?
I like to gamble, but I don't know if I put money on that, because it's a frustrating process. We did really well, but the requirements we have to go through are challenging. It is, the background, the psychological exam, the physical exam they do what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to weed out undesirables that go into a law enforcement position, but they are difficult. So because of I would say yes, there's a high probability if I was only short one person, but I am short more than one. So it's a lot. We've all talked about this before. We are down a significant amount of people. So I got to get a significant amount of people to get us to minimum staffing.
Fair enough.
If I could surmise, try to put the glass half full on the top half of the glass with this. Since we have budgeted for half an FTE for the entire year, and it sounds like it would be a real stretch to find anybody within 6 to 8 months, but maybe after that, possibly. The same amount of money for half a person the whole year is the equivalent to all of the money, so a full-time person for 6 months. So our budget would be adequate to have a full-time code enforcement officer for 6 months.
Right? Yeah.
Even alone at 8.5.
For this budget year.
And by the time we get to creating next year's budget, we'll know whether or not we have somebody in that seat at full-time, and we can go from there.
Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Okay, so do you have any questions for me?
Thanks for bringing that on.
Well, I know Kevin does. No,
You did a great job, Dave.
There you go, that's it, so we're gonna.
Yeah.
That's just a first. Yeah, there you go.
All right, well, I move that we approve the solid waste budget fund
Oh,
for.
wait, you have to ask
No, 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 no.
You have to ask us if there's any public input first.
Oh.
Oh.
I missed that part. Is there any public input?
Yep, we're up.
It's good,
Debbie's there, Debbie's in the back.
Oh. Do you have anybody on?
No. That's it.
I have one question, Dave. I know you're looking at doing like a year-round recycling or something I've seen citywide, I mean.
Countywide,
Yeah.
side, yeah?
Yeah. Money allocated for that in this budget?
No.
Okay.
No. So I'll give you a brief response to that. The state's going through what's called the Recycling Modernization Act and this huge overhaul
Yeah.
to roll out a new system available to everyone, everywhere in the state. All the same recycling materials, the same conditions and stuff like that. Go into effect July 1st, 2025. And it's my estimate that Tillamook County, depending on which system or what type of system what we go for, so what we've already said, yes, we want to improve. And in the next 6 to 8 months, we need to figure out exactly what we need for that, to get to that level. And
Supplemental.
I'm guessing $2.5 to $3 million.
Okay.
But that's not our money. So the manufacturers have to pay into what's called a PRO, a Producer Responsibility Organization. And that PRO is responsible for bringing us up to the level. And if it costs $2 million, then it costs $2 million. If it costs $4 million, then it costs $4 million. It has to be realistic.
Right.
But that is money that they provide for us for capital infrastructure.
Right.
So trucks, carts, reload facilities, baler, et
So
cetera.
it sounds like a good thing.
Yeah, I'm guessing $2.5 to $3 million is what we're looking to receive. That may or may not show up in our budget, because we're not sure how that's gonna roll out either.
Thank you.
But it's not yet.
Right, I just seen some stuff on it.
Well, we need to figure out our things now,
Oh, yeah.
but money's not gonna be here for a couple of years.
Any additional comments, questions, concerns?
So I have a motion that has been suggested by the treasurer. So if you don't mind, I will read the motion suggested by the treasurer. So I move to approve the budgets for solid waste 410, solid waste sinking 420, solid waste post-closure reserve 430, solid waste department, and $1 per month solid waste service fee for developed property.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Looks like we have a budget.
Good job.
Well done, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everyone. Robust discussion is always fun.
Sorry, I got something hot.